Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Chanel. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Thanks so much for joining this episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to have a great discussion today, talk about cyber law and how to make sure that Congress can represent us the right way. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Chalon. Welcome to this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 5-6 minutes. Today, we're going to be talking with Reid about cyber law and how to make sure that Congress can understand what's going on in IT cyber, and also a little bit about his background as a chief of staff of two former Air Force CIOs. Stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 6 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. Thanks so much for joining us in the next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about a couple of minutes now. We're going to be talking about cyber law. How do we make sure that we can explain Congress and tell Congress exactly what to do when it comes to cybersecurity, innovation, making sure we move at the pace of relevance. And also, we're going to talk to our guest, Reid, about his background as the chief of staff of two former Air Force CIOs as well. This is going to be fun, so please wait another couple of minutes and we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom, the former Chief Software Officer for the Air Force and Space Force. Thanks so much for joining us today in this next episode of In the Nick of Time. This is going to be a fun one, a pretty different one from the usual episodes we do on tech stuff and boring deep dives on technology. This is going to be a broader subject that's going to pretty much relate to anybody here. So that's going to be very exciting. First, before we get started, I wanted to remind you, if you did not already do this, to please register for our mailing list at inthenickofTime.tv. Also, if you have a YouTube account, if not, you should create one just to be able to subscribe to our videos on Nick Shalom on YouTube. You're gonna see we're gonna be releasing not only the episodes of the show every Tuesday, but also every Friday, technical deep dives. So that's going to go a little bit deeper in the weeds of technology. So for people that like that, And if you missed the last two videos, the one on Kubernetes itself, and then the one on why we believe Kubernetes is a must, even if you think it is overkill for your organization. So go check it out. We'd love to get your feedback as well. All right, so before we get started with this episode, and that's the link if you want to see all these video we just talked about. We also have the top 5 DevSecOps tools for 2022 as well. Before we get started, if you want to share who you're with as well and your name and your company in the comment section, we'll be able to highlight you on the screen. And also, if you have questions, please make sure you start with the Q so we know it's a question so we can ask our guest today your questions live. All right. One piece of news, if you missed it, unfortunately, my dear friend, and he was a guest on this show a few weeks ago, Preston Dunlap announced yesterday that he's going to be also leaving the Air Force and Space Force to create a space software company. So that's a big loss, again, for the department. He kind of raised awareness again yesterday in his exit note. If you missed it, go check out his post on LinkedIn, where he released a 6-7 page guidance, document for the department to keep moving forward and making sure we don't lose the momentum we're seeing, to remove some of the complacency and keep pushing that fight against China. So go check it out. Pretty exciting stuff that he published, and a lot of great feedback already being received on the LinkedIn post. I'll be also posting the link to his post on LinkedIn as well. So stay tuned for that if you want to get a deep dive on what Preston has done in the last 3 years, which is probably the largest achievement I've seen really for the DoD. And he just released also his guidance letter. So I'm gonna put this now on the chat. So if you want to check that out, it's right here. I'm gonna highlight that also on the screen so you can get to see it right here. So check that out. That's a big loss for the department, unfortunately. All right, so now I'm gonna bring our guest today on the screen. Welcome, Reid. Thanks so much for joining us today. So excited to have you. First, before we let you give you the chance to tell us a little bit about yourself, I'm gonna try to do it some justice, although I'm not gonna be as good as you. But Reid Novotny is currently a member of the Maryland General Assembly and a colonel in the Maryland Air National Guard. I don't know how you get to do all this stuff. I don't know if you ever sleep, but that's pretty cool. Obviously, you're dedicated to serving. One can tell. You want to make Maryland a better place to live, work, and retire. You retired from the Air Force, in fact, 1,600 days before you were eligible. So that's always interesting. That's going to be part of some of the questions we're going to be asking you as to why that makes sense, and what kind of benefits you end up seeing, and kind of what was your plan there as well. Of course, you volunteer a lot with your daughter's school. You serve in the National Guard, specializing in cyber, which is pretty rare. We'll be talking about how difficult it's been for you to kind of explain to the rest of your colleagues what cyber is about, and what kind of misunderstanding or what kind of lack of understanding in general of cyber you're facing every day, and how to avoid kind of bloated cyber laws that could effectively become potentially detrimental to the outcomes we're targeting here. Also, you served as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, both for General Bender and also Bill Marion. So right before Lauren took the CIO's job. So that's going to be pretty cool to get some of your kind of feedback on what's going on, and also maybe tell us a little bit of what you've seen in the building for so many years, and maybe what kind of lessons learned you end up seeing there. So for people that want to follow you, of course, you're on LinkedIn. Who is not? And you got your Twitter handle here. And if anyone is wants to make a difference and wants to volunteer for your Senate, state Senate campaign, they can go on read4md.com/volunteer and do that. With that, I love to bring you in and really first let us get a better understanding of your kind of unique, journey here. That's not often we have a guest like you on the show, so we're pretty excited.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate you allowing me to come on to your show and spend some time with you and the rest of your audience, of course. I do have a slightly different story than most. A lot of people, especially that grew up in the time of pre-September 11th, joined the military either for 4 years, 6 years. Once you got past about 6 or 8 years, most people end up retiring. I always say to people that I didn't join the military to retire, I joined to serve. So my path actually ended up leading me a couple of times through the Pentagon, but the last time I was there, I had served for 15 years, 4 months, 3 days. Not that I was counting the entire time because I enjoyed every time, but when you leave, they actually print on your paperwork as you leave that you have that much time in service. And when I left there, I really had made that choice to just leap, right? So that's some of the things we're going to talk about, and just leap into doing commercial work and also being an elected official and also working at a company and those kind of things. My time through the Air Force, so I think was unique in the sense that I really, as you can imagine, wanted to be a political science major. But when you apply for a scholarship in the Air Force in the 90s, they didn't really need a lot of political science majors, as you can imagine. So they gave me a computer science degree. And I went through George Washington University, got an undergrad and graduate degree, joined the Air Force, as served in a multitude of locations, just ended up being, just right place, right time. Starting really with down at Barksdale when we were standing up the AFNOS, which was the consolidation, moved up to DISA. I was the aide de camp to someone your audience will probably know, Harry Radke, whose son, Chad Radke, is a one-star. Ended up getting married there, which is awesome. The best highlight of that tour, going out to be a flight commander in Hickam, which is awesome. Coming back to the Pentagon, it's great. Comm Squadron Commander out at Massawa, awesome. Back to the Pentagon again. So I really flip-flopped between out in the in the real Air Force and then back at the Pentagon every other tour, it seemed like. And that brought me up to living in Maryland. And once we got here, our daughter was 4 years old and had lived in 3 houses in the first 4 years of her life. And we really just tried to settle down and then figure out what life meant after that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. As I traveled the Air Force and traveled the world and started my family and started doing some other professional work.
One regret I have, leaving the Air Force, of course, is helping the great airmen and war fighters, but also not spending more time, on the real Air Force that you just called. Of course, with COVID, it was tough, right? 2 of my 3 years with COVID were kind of limited in travel, and so that kind of was a bummer because I had a lot of trips, scheduled. I also know the kind of disruption, we create when we travel, and so I didn't want to go places just for the heck of traveling, which a lot of people seem to love and love to spend some of that good taxpayer money, right? But at the same time, if you do things in vacuums and you're not kind of tracking the problems you see on the ground, that's a problem too. So that I had obviously great access to people via LinkedIn and different modern way of communication, but it just doesn't replace what you can see on site.
You're exactly right. And I actually was thinking back about my career, getting ready for talking with you today. And when I was out at Hickam, you'll appreciate this because this is old school software development from the field kind of conversation. In 2000, so I came in around 2000, but mid 2006, 2007, 2008, about 2008 is when we started this software program. And it was to replace the folders, like the literal folders that we were moving around our EPRs, OPRs, and decorations, all of our performance reports. So in the beginning of time there, obviously we had online storage. SharePoint was an example. It was deployed everywhere. I was just so flabbergasted that the Air Force was still passing around 3.5-inch floppies. We were asking companies to make 3.5-inch floppy drives in that time frame, just so we could continue our processes that our Air Force Personnel Center didn't have figured out. But that's really what actually made me excited about the Air Force is as a young captain, I worked with some other software developers and we transformed what AFPC was doing from the field. And we actually made an online EPR and OPR routing system that was replaced by VPC, which is what they currently use. But it was used in the Air Force for 7 years. All the MAJCOMs used it, and it was developed in the field and just picked up by people throughout the time. And it was one of those experiences where, you know, a dedicated group of people in the field could actually make a difference. And I know you are a champion of finding those ideas out in the Air Force and actually bringing them up and making them real.
Yeah, it's so tough, right? Because you have so many people coming up with great ideas, and unfortunately, they just have nowhere to go. There's a few, you know, Spot Tank and different things that were created over the years, but it's a pretty small set of programs or applications being selected, and so you see a lot of them either, you know, being maintained by one or two airmen, you know, and then you also see the other side of this, which was also a little bit scary, right? There's always two sides to the coin, right? Where you had a lot of people doing the same thing in vacuums, and that was also a problem for me because, you know, we want to have the best of breed and we want to have a cohesive implementation if you want to get proper data and proper visibility, you know, on what's going on. And you would see sometimes, unfortunately, you know, because of lack of enterprise services, you would see airmen having to create things, you know, at the wing level or whatever, and then they would not be able to kind of share across teams. And so that's another side of kind of the issue is how do you create a system that enables first to sustain and maintain the great ideas, but also like making sure people know they exist and know they don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, that costs obviously some money, but also it's a lot of cyber risk. It's a lot of issue when it comes to tracking data. And, you know, we do a very poor job. I actually had a great call last week with a company that got selected for cyber. And, you know, they got a cyber phase 2 and they built this amazing AIML based application to track, you know, the training and performance of the pilots. Right. And so for me, just at my 70 hour of training of, you know, becoming a private pilot myself with my little plane, of course, not as fast as the, you know, the airman jet fighter pilots, but, you know, still pretty tough.
You've got 70 more hours than I do, so keep going, please.
It's probably the hardest thing I had to learn, honestly. It's way more than I thought. But anyway, I saw this app, right, funded by a cyber phase 2. And ACC has been, you know, pushing it, and it's just awesome. I mean, it's something I would actually use on the commercial side. You know, the sales director made a comment that just, you know, gave me anxiety. He said, you know, I said, why don't we promote it? You know, why don't we push it across not only the Air Force, but also like, you know, outside of the Air Force as well, maybe on the commercial side. I mean, people want to get better at, you know, flying, and, you know, they were tracking like metrics of, you know, approaches and landings and keeping altitude and all these different things, right? And he said, you know, I don't want to, you know, burn the relationship with ACC. And I'm like, the whole point of cybers is to do, you know, to do that, right? To have commercial engagements and government engagements and scale this and help you grow, right? It's not to die on the shelf in a government building, you know. And I said, why not reach out to F-22s and 35s and, you know, B-21 and all these guys, right? And they were just very concerned, like, you know, what is ACC going to say, right? And I'm like, well, you know, I'm not saying burn the bridge, right? But I don't see why ACC will not be happy to see their investment spreading across the Air Force on other jet fighters and different things. So it's just, you know, it's just scary sometimes to see like the valley of death is created at multiple angles. I mean, you know, when I saw the resignation of Preston, he kind of did a pretty good job, you know, explaining kind of what we could be doing to stop that valley of death of transition, right? But there is a piece that's self-inflicted that we don't talk a lot about, whether it's ego-driven or just incompetence or just, you know, fear of failing or fear of people's reaction. You know, it's and that's just you know, tough to see a company, right, that's built an amazing capability, honestly, with you know, a few people, maybe, you know, 2 or 3 people at first, and now maybe 6, you know, and honestly, that's probably the most advanced, tangible application I've seen, you know, using AI and ML capabilities, and just to see the fear of when I said, you know, let's just blast it on my LinkedIn. You know, I said, let's do a video, right, of this app and show people, right, they're gonna love it. And he was, I don't know, I don't know if we should do this, and it's just like, that's why cyber were created to do, and so anyway, yeah, sorry for
Yeah,
the tangent, but it's interesting.
I really think you're describing a systematic problem with the DoD or the Air Force in general, in the sense that people do have a lot of fear of change. You described, getting the authoritative data and moving forward and those kind of things. It is, there's so many systematic problems. One of them is the fact that you need a champion. Preston Dunlap, yourself, Lauren Nassenberger, they're all champions of change and moving forward. The problem is we have a lot of these officers too that are champions of change that move every 2 to 3 years. Yeah. So you have this great idea, this person, he or she comes in to ACC or wherever they're going, or the Pentagon, and they're like, we need to change this. So it takes them 6-8 months to really figure out where the bathroom is. Then they find out this great program, this great idea. Then they beat the crap out of it, right? And they move hard. They get people to say yes. They get it funded. And then they concentrate on the last 6 months of their PCS cycle on how they're moving to their next job. So the combination of having steady civilians who are going to move the ball forward, as the few that I mentioned, but also some of the officers and senior enlisted people, it does not set up the Air Force for success, in my opinion, to moving out on an idea and actually seeing it to fruition through that valley of death that you're talking about. And the Air Force we're just not set up in the right way to be a successful company, as you described it, within the Air Force, to make change and actually make long-lasting change. And one of the things that always had bothered me about being on active duty too is that there was always a bigger program that was about to be replaced that was going to take the place of what you're talking about. And I know this probably eats you up inside in the sense that we do these massive programs, and we're getting better at it in the Air Force, but we do these massive programs to fix it all. But that fix it all program just never comes out of the drawing board. Basically, it gets defunded after a while. And I faced that when I was working on the personnel EPRs and OPR routing that I was working on. Is there was Dimers or one of these programs that was multiple billions of dollars supposed to fix it all. And I kept on going to the personnel people and I said, okay, when is it coming out? And they said, next year. I was like, I will be the first person to shut down my system next year when it comes out. Guess what? That program never came out. It just never came out. We spent billions of dollars. They basically defunded it after a while, and it never came out. And the VPC was born like 10 years later, basically, out of the ashes. So those combination of processes just make the Air Force very difficult to really make iterative change, purposeful change, like you can do in the commercial sector.
Yeah, you said so many interesting things here, right? The first piece was, hey, we're funding these massive programs often bloated, right? And they have a tough time even, delivering any tangible value after a few weeks, months, years, and many times end up dying on the shelf. The issue is often because it's bloated and there's not a real understanding of DevSecOps and how to deliver incremental capabilities in production, in the hands of the warfighter to be able to see what's happening. On the other side, also, you mentioned, the fact that, that we rotate people so quickly. It's very interesting, right? Because there's almost like also two sides to that coin. I argue often that, we're stuck in the DoD bubble and we have people staying their entire career in that DoD bubble, not knowing what's going on the commercial side. And I argue that many of these guys, if you were to send them 2 weeks at SpaceX, their head would explode looking at the velocity and speed of SpaceX, right? At the same time, like you said, the same people end up rotating too fast, and you have this kind of untold, rule of like, oh, we're just going to wait him out or her out, and then, keep doing more of the same. And it's just a matter of playing time, so that's very common too, right? So, and then you have the third piece, which is, hey, we're putting people, very well-intentioned and, often based on ranks and achieving different things like becoming a material leader or a senior material leader, and putting them in charge of programs where they have zero background in the technology or zero experience really getting this kind of stuff done. You put someone in charge of cloud that's never even ran a cloud in their basement, let alone the most complex, multi-domain, multi-classification level cloud for 4 million, people. very difficult, to begin with, even if you have experience, right? But almost impossible if you don't, right? And then we can blame those guys, right? They're doing their best, right? They're being told that effectively all it takes is managing people, where the fact is, if you look on the commercial side, right, the most successful organizations often have a visionary behind it. You look at Elon Musk, you look at Bezos, you look at all these people. Often there's this guy behind it, kind of pushing this kind of incredible vision that everybody thinks, often they're just crazy, right? It's never going to happen. But then they start delivering things, slowly but surely, taking risks. The fact that DARPA is so afraid of failing and kind of shutting down every time there is one, missile that went wrong or launch that went wrong, and they're going to do a 1-year investigation on what happened of a report. Meanwhile, China did 200 launches of hypersonic missiles, right? And the U.S. has done 9. That's a pretty concerning thing, right? So anyway, let's dig into a little bit of your, we talk about your journey, very intriguing, obviously. And, the first piece I wanted to go over with you was the cyber kind of push you're doing. I've been pushing, kind of trying to educate Congress. I've been to many meetings and many engagements, both at the House and the Senate, both with staffers and congressmen and senators, trying to explain a little bit what cyber is about. Sometimes it's a quite funny and interesting engagement. Sometimes it's actually interesting how some people you wouldn't expect, even older, sometimes understand more than I thought. So how tough has it been for you, right? When you're looking at some of the engagements you're doing now, trying to push some of these laws, how tough has it been for you to explain really what cyber is to some of these elected officials?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I thoroughly enjoy doing this. And I say that in the sense that as a young officer, we started off. I started off, and most officers back in the day were communications officers. So our generic job was I was lieutenant. I ran around. I talked to some tech sergeant who actually knew what they were doing, and then I would talk to my colonel and say, "This is what's wrong with the network." So that go between that, explaining it to, I don't want to say a lay person, but a person who has no idea what's going on, is really been the entirety of my cyber career. When I joined, of course, we were not very technical, as in the new lieutenants now are hands-on keyboard type of people. So when I got down to Annapolis, there's plenty of lawyers, plenty of small business owners, plenty of people who are retired, several professions out there. Very, very little, if zero, people who have any type of experience with cybersecurity, computers in general, more than just turning on an iPad. But I get those questions too. So some of my colleagues ask me those questions. But I found this out the first legislative session when I was down there. And there are a couple of types of bills that no matter what, they get bipartisan, 100% support. The first one is, elderly people, right? Anything to do with a retiree, giving them a tax break, making life easier, those kind of things, gets 100% support. And you know why? Because they vote. The next one, which is awesome, is veterans, right? Nobody on either side of the aisle wants to be seen as being anti-veteran. So any veteran bill that came up, it was 100% support. Nobody said anything. Hey, this is great. Third category, pets. I think this is random, but again, who wants to be the person who votes against little fluffy cat, little fluffy dog? It's ridiculous, right? So you got those three, which are awesome. But the last category that I saw was cybersecurity. And the reason why people didn't vote against cybersecurity was the fact that they had no idea what they were talking about. They had no idea what they were voting on, but they knew they wanted to be part of the future, part of the, what are we doing in Maryland, for example, on cybersecurity? We know we want some of that goodness, as I voted for cybersecurity and I made you as a Marylander better in cyberspace because I voted for this bill. So we can peel back the onion and say, okay, well, that's great. I'm glad we have that kind of support for cybersecurity laws, but are the laws that we are pushing through the right type of laws? And that's really this year when I came through, there were 3 big laws, and we can get as in deep as you want. But the first one I looked at, this was just, it was the easiest thing in my mind. I put forth 2 amendments, and one of the amendments literally said it just wanted to change one word in how we funded things. So this was a funding bill, And it said, you can buy anything in the state of Maryland at the state and local level through this funding source if it is hardware, software, a device, or a firewall. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, hardware, software, device, hardware, software, device. Well, first of all, it doesn't say anything about like as a service. So, I mean, I won't even get into that with these legislators. They're not going to understand. Let's just see if they'll take an amendment on the floor to get rid of the word firewall. And the reason why I did that was the fact that firewall indicates that, first of all, I mean, we can get into a zero trust argument and you'll probably blow my socks off, but I'm sure your audience understands firewalls are, the best of 1980s. It didn't say a next generation firewall. It just said firewalls. Firewalls came out in the 80s. They're still used today, all those kind of things. But why are we calling out a firewall in our cybersecurity law of 2022? What I got back on the floor in the debate was, you got to trust the experts. So I'll pause there for a second. So if you can explain to me and the audience what the difference between a hardware, software, a device, or a firewall is, maybe I could have used your argument against or with to shed some light. What might you have said differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, that's kind of the issue you see a lot, right? I actually also, created policies and things in the department, and you always have someone high enough to take it and kind of tweak it enough to create a disastrous policy, right? Like I created the cloud native access point, the continuous ATO, right? So you can release multiple times a day, and the DoD CISO took it and be like, well, we're going to do these continuous ATO things, but I'm only going to be the only one approving them. So he created a massive bottleneck, in terms of who can approve what, right? And so you see the kind of the same with everything, right? They're trying to do cyber law. Firewalls is probably the only term they even remotely understand. It's definitely obsolete. Zero trust is completely moving away from perimeter and all that kind of concept. So pushing a law, in 2022, talking about firewalls is literally pushing the wrong things. And that's where it's so important to be flexible enough, but not too much. It is balanced, right? Because you don't want to let people do and potentially get different kind of benefits, buying the wrong things or doing the wrong things with the wrong outcome in mind. So it's I get it, right? They want to try to bound it, but there's just this is so bad, right? I mean, there's just no way to even defend their logic here. Because there's none, and trust the expert. Well, which expert did you use to write this? This is not, and that's where also I guess lobbying comes in, right? And that's what I've seen a lot is maybe there was a firewall company trying to push some of that stuff, right?
You're exactly right. And so two things, and they called me Mr. Firewall for a while just because I just wanted to harp on this issue because it was so absurd to me, if that makes sense. So one was this nice lady who is about to retire. She's probably 82, 86. I don't know how old she is. She got up at the end of my spiel about why we don't need firewalls and said, and this is a true statement, the Maryland Department of Health that was doing a lot of, and this is maybe 6 months ago at best, is doing a lot of the COVID response, displaying all the COVID results and statistics for all of Maryland, and then doing things like the death certificates for Maryland. So people had to get information from the Department of Health to have a funeral, all those kind of things, those benefits. Very important department, right? Well, it was hacked through ransomware, right? So that's all of a true statement. We can go down why that was hacked and all that. But she stood up and said, I am for keeping the word firewall because it was firewalls that kept our Department of Health working after they were hacked. And my mind was just like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't even say that with a straight face. You have no idea what you're talking about. It was a typical ransomware that went like left, right, after it got in through the firewall in some link that they clicked on, right? So I was like, literally, what I wanted to say is we should go through and toward a zero trust architecture to bring all of our state assets into compliance with what the current architecture of the internet is going toward. So if we had a zero trust architecture, we wouldn't have been ransomware. We would have lost like one machine and that would have been great. We would have kept on going. I like, it befuddles me, the hubris that this person who has no idea what they're talking about would even get up. It's like me saying, I'm glad we had the toilet plunger, They had no idea what it was even talking about. They could have used any word there, and they're like, well, I'm just for it. And that's what is upsetting is that back to who is actually sponsoring these bills and actually working on the bills. I know a lot of the people who are working on it. So through my time in the Guard, there's actually a committee from a lot of the departments, to include the Maryland Military Department, that have input into some of these laws that they were creating over the interim, the 9 months between our sessions. One of the people who was appointed on that is the J6, right? The Maryland J6. That was me when my previous job. So I was Colonel Novotny giving input to this committee for 2 years as I was the J6 for the state of Maryland, giving input to this. So again, when this member of the opposite party, doesn't matter, I mean, I'm sure both parties play these games, the opposite party said, we need to trust the experts. I stood up and I said, well, okay, I am the expert. My name is, I was on this committee as Colonel Novotny giving input, but now that I have a different letter after my name and my title here, you're not going to take my opinion. So this is literally putting politics over cybersecurity people or cybersecurity welfare of the people of Maryland. And I was beyond frustrated, as you can tell with my animation, but it's the not willing to learn. That's the biggest thing. So we can explain cybersecurity to a 10-year-old, my daughter's 10, but you have to be willing to learn if you're in a position of that power and take different inputs from people like myself.
It's interesting because I offered actually to do some briefings to a lot of people in Congress. Only a very few, maybe a handful, said yes. Most people offering to do briefings are trying to sell them stuff, right? That's how this works. With me, I have nothing to sell. So you will think, hey, this is great. We're going to actually have an unbiased, push of, well, maybe it's biased on my opinion, but at least not biased based on money or, people trying to buy me out. And so you would think they would have jumped right to the occasion of like, I wanted to do a brief on AI/ML, right? I wanted to do a brief on zero trust and actually explain what it is and why it matters, and kind of explain it to an audience, that's not technical and really explain the one-on-one, basic things so they actually can take that and learn and grow, right? But only maybe, 4 or 5 offices were okay doing it. And even that, it was often like, 30 minutes with the actual senator or congressman, and then the rest was with the staffers, which is fine, right? But, and then they go on committees and have to make pretty important decisions, and you would think important things like this is going to determine the future of the U.S. for the next, years to come. They would spend a little bit more time.
You're exactly right. And, this is actually what I found was that they were actually listening, and I will qualify who they are. So I'm in the House of Delegates. I'm on one side of the chamber. The Senate's the other side, right? So this is how does a bill become a law conversation. Everyone knows it has to be passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the executive, by the governor. So when I'm giving all my speeches, I'm tearing into these things like, why do we have this? Why do we have that? One of the really inflammatory things that I brought out was there was a list of different agencies within the state of Maryland that were exempt. The Stadiums Authority. Well, that kind of makes sense because the Stadiums Authority runs the Orioles and the Ravens. They're really a private organization that is kind of run by Maryland, but kind of not, different than a Department of Health or Transportation, those kind of things. So I'm like, got it. Well, you read down this list of like 7 different things, a couple of universities or whatnot. The last one on the list is the State Board of Elections. And I got up and this is like prove the point that, first of all, the Senate was listening, and I'll tell you why, but no one read it, right? Everyone wanted to be part of state cybersecurity, but no one had actually read this bill, because when you read it, it's just inflammatory because we sit out, the national narrative. Our elections need to be free. They need to be fair. They need to be secure. Nobody says any different, right? Republicans, Democrats, Independents, it doesn't matter what party you're part of. If this bill is so good, if it's so good about increasing the cybersecurity of the people of Maryland, why would we exempt the State Board of Elections from being under it? Basically, all the reporting requirements and all those kind of things. So I say all this on the House floor. They take none of my amendments, right? So I get all my amendments shot down. because I happen to be in the minority party of the two parties we have in Maryland. But the Senate was listening. So the Senate stripped out almost everything I said. So when it went over to the committee on the Senate side, they actually made all these changes. And I was happy about that, right? There at no point was I trying to make a political point, to the sense that, I have this folder, right? I printed out all my notes. I actually sent this to the person defending the bill. And I said, these are all my unfiltered notes. And he happened to be, he's a Marine Corps vet, nice individual, happens to be on the other side of the aisle and the majority party. I said, these are all my unfiltered comments. Please just make these. It'll be better for cybersecurity. So when he didn't even respond back to my email. And we sit across the aisle from each other. Our offices are. He did not even respond back to my email. So, I was forced back into the corner. I said, well, okay, now it's time to embarrass everyone. And I did that in the sense that they didn't know what they were talking about. And I didn't do it in a derogatory term. I wasn't trying to trip them up. I literally just sent them all my questions and said, here's all the answers. And then I just read those questions out. And they didn't even have the common decency to respond back to me and say, no, those are bad ideas. Or like, hey, we're not going to do this at this time. They just ignored me, except for when it went over to the Senate. They took all the changes. And then when we finally passed it, it actually ended up being a marginally good bill. So I'm actually pretty impressed on how the overall process, disappointed in the politicization of something like cybersecurity, but impressed on how we actually got through the end process and signed a couple of good bills into law in Maryland.
Did they tell you why they had exempted the Board of Election? I mean, it sounds like if they believe in cybersecurity and they believe in the importance of all that stuff, I don't see why you would. I mean, maybe you would give a little bit of time for people to catch up, or if they know the cyber posture of some things are pretty bad or whatnot, right? And you want to give time for people to address issues. That's fair, right? But why would you just exempt something like this? Did they say the reasoning behind it?
So they did not write back and say, here's the exact reason. I even, asked on the floor, the House floor, why would you exempt the State Board of Elections? And they went back to their default answer. You got to trust the experts. This is why, though, in my opinion.
So what expert said? The expert said cyber doesn't matter for
elections.
Exactly.
Cyber doesn't matter in State Board of Elections. I mean, obviously they have traditional IT networks that support all the registration and the actual vote tallying and all those kind of things. It's it's a standalone machine that's not. The last time I looked into it,
they keep saying it's not connected, but I can tell you, I was at DHS and I audited a lot of election systems, and I've seen Windows 7 running. I've seen Windows 7 running, and I've seen it connected more than it was supposed to be. So it's just
you're exactly right. And so to answer your first question, then get into the Windows 7 thing. The first question is, so our State Board of Elections, and I think this is similar in most states, is such a separate entity. They are not. They're under the executive branch on paper, at least, but they don't report to the governor.
Oh, I see.
The person can't be fired. So it's more of a legal issue where they're not reporting.
Which kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense.
So it does. So it does in that sense. But back to your Windows 7 thing, it's so embarrassing that, and it's back to the Air Force too, and the large DoD. We have to run an approved version of an election security software, not the most. The least risk, least vulnerable version. So when I was doing some work with them, 100%, I saw that it was running a Windows 7 operating system where Windows 10 had been out for like 3 years. But that was the approved version of operating system for not the least vulnerable, which is how big DoD organizations and big government organizations run things, which just is so infuriating.
Yeah, it used to fly right back then, and with the velocity of cyber and IT, it's just not something we can do anymore. And I think people are gonna have a pretty hard awakening. You look at the number of release of 0 days and critical CVEs. It's just the pace is just not. You don't have the luxury of time anymore. I guess you used to get away with it for longer, right? So there's a question before. Usually we don't take questions before the end of the show, but halfway of the show, I guess. But this question is really kind of based on what you were talking about. So I'm going to give it a shot first, and then I'll let you kind of add whatever you want to add to that. Carmine was asking, can you include next generation firewalls, which you did talk about, but there is a school of thought that next generation firewall can work with zero trust and even act as a cornerstone. So here's my take, right? You always need some level of perimeter defense. When you move to a real zero trust stack, that becomes your ingress egress for your north-south traffic. One could call it next generation firewall, WAF, could be different names. So there's definitely a piece, and there's a policy enforcement point when it comes to a software-defined perimeter that's going to do the controller and whitelist the traffic based on your device identity and who you are. And so it's going to compound the risk of the user of the device, and it's going to kind of whitelist the traffic. So it acts pretty much as a firewall, right? It's a layer 7 firewall. So it's able to do a little bit better, but I would never call that the cornerstone, though. I mean, it's a very important piece. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's cornerstone, but it's certainly not out of the picture. It's just a different kind. Often, what people used to call next generation firewall before zero trust came out, were kind of the evolution of the normal firewall that became a little bit more aware of the layer 7 stuff, and it's still very much like this kind of monolithic construct with a move to Kubernetes and containers and all this stuff. We're moving to sidecar containers and things that are more decoupled, and you have a Envoy as a reverse proxy that runs as an ingress proxy, and all these kind of things. It's very flexible. So my fear is if you use the term next generation firewall, that's going to go more towards the middle, still legacy fire. I mean, it's I guess it's less legacy, but it's still legacy firewalls versus the modern stuff we do with the policy enforcement point. So I would actually call it a PEP, policy enforcement point, or a controller gateway for SDP gateway, SDP controller. Those are terms that you would use now. If you use next generation firewall, you could have a lot of companies that they would claim they're doing zero trust, but it's really just basic next generation firewall. So I would kind of stay away from that.
So a lot of things to unpack there. And again, I trust the experts, and joking back to our last conversation, a lot of engineers that I work with who would be able to explain this more elegantly than I can. What I view as a next generation firewall is that transition. So you brought up a lot of things that are what I would consider actual zero trust in the permission aspect of how future state will be. I think next generation firewalls help us get from where we're at in a traditional perimeter defense firewall, 1980s version of moat and castle and protecting your network to where we want to be in the future. Next generation firewalls are all up in that business, but you can't go to any company. I don't think any cybersecurity Gartner chart, Magic Quadrant, without someone saying I'm part of the zero trust architecture. And a lot of them are. I like next generation firewalls for our transition. Maybe in 5 years, we never talk about firewalls again. If all these companies have moved to what you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. All right. So there's way more questions, but I'm going to keep on going on
keep the questions going. I love questions, everyone.
So here we go. So, of course, you talk about some of the laws that end up, being pretty good at the end of the day, right? And kind of the Senate kind of saving the day, I guess. Tell us a little bit about what were the desired outcomes? I mean, challenges, I guess you talked about it, but if you have more, give us some of that. But I'm also, I'm always concerned, right, when people just say, "Oh, we're going to come up with laws and things," right? And they forget, like, okay, but what are we trying to do, right? I'm concerned we don't have enough going on to protect our data, right? Europe did GDPR. A lot of people criticize GDPR, but the fact is, at least it did something. We did nothing. China, created the Shanghai Data Exchange, getting access to data coming from Europe and U.S. companies, and companies are dumb enough to sell their data on there. And of course, the CCP get a free copy of all the data flowing there, right? So they're pretty smart, right? China is not waiting for us to figure it out. So what would you say were the key objectives of these laws?
So you mentioned a couple of countries, right? Russia, China, in Europe as an area that have done something, right, to move forward in cybersecurity. I like to say this because I think it's very true. what makes America great actually makes us less secure in cybersecurity. And to break that down is that we have companies here that run our infrastructure, right? We have local city, county governments. We have all these state and federal agencies. But our federalist society, our federal constitutional government actually allows for dissension in all aspects all the way down the road. So you had mentioned CISA and DHS before. They put out great products for local government if you choose to use them. There's no imperative that you must. Thou shall do best practice X, Y, or Z to make yourself more cyber secure. Thou shall do ABC to make sure your citizens' data is more secure. So really, my bottom line up front on this was to actually get the ball rolling with some of the cybersecurity baseline to make sure that not only were companies involved, we went back to this, there's some arrogance where you're the single CISO for a county and you've got it all figured out. I tell you what, God bless that person who's got it all figured out. But we needed to put some baseline to make sure that we had some laws on the books so that not only could these like county and city governments and state agencies go for help with our Maryland Department of IT CISO and the like, but we actually empowered our CISO for the state to actually be a strong player in this. I know for a fact that it was difficult. They have consolidated services like cloud services they offer for state agencies, but you don't have to opt in, right? So it was part of that to say, why don't we incentivize the different state agencies to opt into a centralized defense? Again, back to what makes America great, makes us less cyber secure, is the sense that they didn't have to. We need to put some laws on the books to incentivize them. That's the way I like to do it versus forcing people to do it, because a lot of the things we can do in cybersecurity are actually a lot easier to do at mass, at scale. And they're actually will protect the individual's data, the people of Maryland, in my case, moving forward.
So were the outcomes mostly focused on the state or county systems, or were there also like there was a piece of maybe kind of giving tools to individual, when I say tools, I in the broad sense of tools, not actual tools, but to the people of Maryland or the companies of Maryland, or was it just focused on the government stuff?
So this was all government based. So I put this in one of my speeches, and I was very depressed. So we missed an opportunity to do anything parochial to some of your viewers as a Maryland first policy. There's a lot of great cybersecurity companies around the U.S. and around the world, but we didn't take the opportunity as a Maryland state legislature to say things like in our procurement law, we could have said, you have to look in Maryland first before you go outside. I bring that up because Baltimore City schools, probably about a year ago, were hacked. And this was during virtual time, during COVID. Students couldn't get to their classrooms, all of this kind of stuff. So what did they do? They found a company in Ohio versus in Columbia, Maryland, to go and do some of the incident response. And I was frustrated because I know that there's 1,001, well, probably not 1,001, 300 great incident response companies, small, medium, big, out of Maryland that could have done that same work. So I was frustrated with that. Then we go back to how do we incentivize great personnel to stay in the government, right? You and I both spent time in the government and then chose for some reason to maybe do something a little different. Well, I found out that they could only pay the most highly educated person as a state employee $140,000 a year. Now, living in the DC area in Maryland, you can't, these people should be making $400,000, $500,000 a year is what they need. So we actually increase that cap just a little bit. So obviously, it's like 170 now. I'll have to look. Yeah. Which is better than nothing, one step at a time.
It's a big increase.
Yeah. Well, the other part too was the procurement, back to your tools. So we didn't give out any tools, but what we did do is allow our Department of IT to procure without going through our procurement arm, which is, that makes sense, right? Up to $1 million. So just like in the DoD or in the Air Force, right? The CIO doesn't do procurement, it's the acquisitions team, right? So just like at the state level, we have an acquisitions organization. So we actually gave, which I think this is great, the authority to spend $1 million on cybersecurity to the Department of IT without having to do that extra insights. Because what would happen is they would set up a contract, then it would get delayed again, and then it would disintegrate, right? The small business would back away or whatever it would do. But that cap used to be at like $200,000. And what can you buy for the state of Maryland for like any marginally sized? I mean, we have 6 million people in the state of Maryland. What can you buy to help any large-ish organization under $1 million in cybersecurity? I think it's very small, if that makes sense. So I was happy about this.
You could buy paper checklists. Paper checklists.
Well, we could do that. We
Lots
could do
pens.
that. Well, some pens, yeah. We could, you could do your ATO on a paper chain instead of the automated way. So
okay. So that didn't address at all, I guess, any of my other concerns when it comes to the requirement for companies in a state to disclose and report that they've been breached, how quickly they have to do it, what kind of, impact that has on PII or PHI data, right? And so do you know how much Maryland
I can answer that one.
Yeah.
So this bill specifically, again, it goes back to it's only state governments, right? It is difficult for us, and I say difficult, like the will of the people, the will of the legislature. It's difficult for us to regulate like an actual private company. So that gets a ton of pushback. With that being said, there actually is
some reporting at least. I mean, they don't have to. They could have some level of reporting, right?
Correct. So this is good in the sense that it sets the foundation, but there is a breach notification period, which is I think 3 days after you notify, or after you realize there's a breach. You actually have to, and this at a state agency level, has to notify up to the CISO. And it's funny because
not the people. Is that public?
So it is public quarterly, basically. So they have to give a report quarterly and yearly to say what they've done. But again, so two aspects. One is the reports themselves. I was concerned about this because the way that they were describing the reports, they were really saying, if you haven't done your vulnerability assessments in an agency, you have to tell us, right? And then the Department of IT, the CISO, was going to report on the worst offenders. So I'm looking at myself and I'm like, so if I'm a hacker wanting to hack an agency, I'm going to look at this as my roadmap of which organization to hack first, right? So it's going to say this one is 10 days overdue and this one's 10 months overdue on their last vulnerability assessment. So they actually cleared up the language. So I want them to report, but I also don't want hackers to use it as a guidepost. But then the other aspect was on the breaches. They actually had some vague verbiage that said you must, it said after you were breached, you have to report within 72 hours. So I stood up and I said, how many companies know that they were breached 2 years ago? Like you're immediately going to have these companies or these institutions out of compliance. So they actually, as it went over to the Senate, they changed the law. And it said after you were like you were notified by someone or someone.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. Any cyber law should have that mentioned. That's kind of
but this goes back to one of your original points. How do you explain this to legislators when they read the law and say they pick up on something like that? Like no one else would really pick up on it unless you understood that some people are hacked for 3-4 years before they realize it.
So is there any discussion on anything around data and privacy and kind of, protection of PII and is there any discussion right now, maybe next year on that kind of subject?
So the one bill that so there are bills that come up often in the health field, right? So we pass laws and a little bit different laws for our HIPAA data that's passed around within the state of Maryland, again, at the state of Maryland level. One bill that was actually very interesting was regulating some commercial companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, any of the ones that do genetic information, like spitting in a cup, all those kind of things. So we actually passed a law that said you cannot use that for gain, right? So if you and I did a genetic test, we actually can't sell the results without notifying the users of that information. So that they said it was a first in the nation kind of regulatory step with the 23andMe's of the world, those companies. But that was the first type of data that they really tried to get after this year to regulate and make sure it was staying. The consumers knew where their data was getting pushed around.
Yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg. China has really done a pretty good job actually when it comes to understanding the importance and power of data. First it's going to enable your digital transformation, but it's also going to help you, train your AI/ML models to automate a lot of this decision-making process. And they're doing a massive investment. The Shanghai Data Exchange is actually pretty small. It pisses me off because we should have been the one doing it first. But the fact that the Department of State and Department of Commerce here has literally zero clue about any of this stuff is pretty concerning, because they're already up and running and already gathering terabyte a day of data, and companies are stupid enough to go sell there and know very well that the data is flowing to the CCP. That's pretty disappointing. So hopefully one day we're gonna catch up there. All right, so let's see. So interestingly enough, right, you were the chief of staff, right, of in your Pentagon, your second, I guess, to the Pentagon, right, where you were the chief of staff for Joel Bender and for Bill Marion, as an SCS. At the time, it wasn't called CIO because I think Bill was deputy CIO. I don't know about Joel Bender. That was way before me. So it wasn't even like, I think the Ender was CIO, which pretty makes no sense whatsoever. I don't know who came up with that nonsense, but we fixed that pretty much now with Lawrence being now the CIO, although, it's still, I think, not, fully on paper, but at least she's called the CIO now, officially and unofficially, I guess. But so what did you see in that office in terms of challenges, but also like, what did you learn, kind of looking at that kind of, CIO shop? A lot of people say, we staff it or think of it as a policy governance shop. And that's obviously, for me, I thought that was a mistake, because you don't see CIOs on the commercial side not being empowered to execute their vision and run their shop and really be accountable and responsible for the entire IT enterprise delivery of capabilities. So tell us a little bit about your time, in the CIO shop.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The Air Force CIO does not own all of the information technology throughout the Air Force. There are so many decision makers. And it was frustrating working for General Bender at that point. And I sat in his office many a times, and basically the stance was, even as a 3-star, the CIO of the Air Force, the A6 of the Air Force, there were so many GS-13s, 14s, 04s, 05s, 06s, down in the chain that can say no to him. And it wasn't necessarily about saying no to him based on his rank, but based on what was best for the Air Force. If it was a policy or maybe consuming some service that was brought up to the very top of the Air Force to make some cloud first policy or whatever it could be. But that was so frustrating. One thing, General Bender and Mr. Marion, still good mentors and friends to this day. Both amazing leaders. General Bender, I don't know if this came out very often, but I was a lieutenant colonel. I had probably too much rank to even meet with him the vast majority of the time. He would have his 03s and 04s that were on staff come in and talk to him. 03s, captains and majors. At the end of the day, they would have bourbon whiskey sessions at the end of the day that I participated in every once in a while. But that was just to talk about, like, what are you seeing in the halls of the Pentagon that are just so frustrated that are not going to get up to the lieutenant general level, right? The 3-star level. He would take the input of those people and then force it back down on his 1-stars and his colonels and say, you got to fix it. So he was rank agnostic and idea positive, right? So he just wanted those good ideas coming through. And one of the things when I got hired into his office, I walked into the chief of staff's office, which was right across the hall in the E-ring. I walked in and I said, hello, is anyone here? there's like 7 different cubes. You've been to the Pentagon 1,000 times, I'm sure. There was all these cubes, and all the cubes are as tall as I am. You couldn't see anyone. How do we make this an actual, group collaborative environment, those kind of things? So I walked back out and went to talk to General Bender, and I said, "Hey, boss, do you mind if I reorganize the desks in my office?" He's like, "Sure, I don't care. So I told one of my guys to come in, bring a screwdriver the next day, and so we took apart the tops of every single cube. We just leveled them out. We gave them all a place to work, and we could all see each other. We could see when people came in, when the 1-stars and colonels are waiting, they could sit down and actually have somewhere to sit. But this is like the antithesis and the perfect point of depending on how it works. We took apart all these cubes, set them in the hallway, and then someone walked by and said, "Did you fill out a piece of paper to do that?" We have a contract. There's a contractor who is paid.
Yeah, you can't do it yourself. You have to pay the union.
Are you kidding me? So I asked them for the piece of paper. I filled it out in front of them, and I said, "Well, now can you take them away?" But this is emblematic of what we do. Like, how do we stifle good work in the Pentagon? That's how we stifle it. We make someone fill out a piece of paper after they've already done something that they want to do that is best for the airmen that are working there. And that is repeated 1,005 times through my time working as the chief of staff. So I just thought your listeners would be entertained by just the absurdity and the bureaucracy that we create for no reason at all.
Yeah. And I had the same issue in my office, and now they're even stricter. I think that there's union stuff there, so they don't let you do it at all. You have to use their service. And I remember getting a quote for my office, because we needed a desk or whatever, and I wanted a normal desk, nothing fancy. I mean, wood. I don't know. And the price was just outrageous, and I'm like, wow, this is what we pay for a desk, and it's just like, wow, this is mind-boggling,
Yeah.
Looking at the amount of the volume we must be buying, you would think you would get a discount. I said I remember thinking I staffed an entire office on the Fifth Avenue. I had an office on Fifth Avenue and 45th in Manhattan, and I had 25 people there, and the cost that it cost me to put furniture for the entire team of 25 people was effectively just double what the cost of one desk at the Pentagon. So that was pretty mind-boggling. So anyway,
it's ridiculous. And I'll add, I know a guest of yours in the past, Lauren Nassenberger. It was one of my last tasks to actually get her hired. So General Bender came to me and he said, "We're going to hire someone from industry, and we're going to hire them as a highly qualified executive, HQE, right? HQE." So when I was the chief of staff, I just don't take no for an answer, right? So I go, "Okay, boss, I agree. Whatever you just said, I'm going to figure out how to do it." He said, "You can do it," because General Bender's a pilot. He's like, "We can hire these people. We can hire them off the street, basically, and they can come in and advise us." So I went up to our personnel, our A1 of the time, my peer over there, and I said, "How do you hire an HQE?" And they said, "HQEs are only used for 4-star pilots to go to red flag to be paid for their advice." And I said, "Not the right answer. Show me the regulation." So I read the regulation. It says you don't have to be a pilot.
Nothing.
And they said, "Well, we've never hired." Exactly. "We've never hired an HQE who was a cyber person," right? And I was like, "Okay, great. We're gonna be the first, right?" And this gets back to my frustration. General Bender had this great applicant, someone off, in industry. I don't remember the individual's name at this point. They came in, went through the process. It took so long, they backed out of the process. So Lauren had applied also. And General Bender was like, I love Lauren. She's great. Let's see. And finally, it was like 6-8 months later, we couldn't get this first person hired. We ended up contacting her. She was all in, and her. She's all in about helping the Air Force, doing the right thing, all those kind of things. So we're like, great. So I ran back over to the A1 and I said, "I am leaving the Air Force. General Bender will not sign my paperwork to join the National Guard unless you get this person hired." And pointing my finger in their chest. And they said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." So we got her the job there. And obviously,
do you remember how long that took?
So the second time around, it was very quick. The first time around, it was probably
define quick for me.
Oh, so the start to finish, it was 6 months of my life that I was working this. The quickness was probably 3.5 to 5 weeks. I think once she said yes, and we ran around the paperwork. So it was not on the job. It wasn't like she was at the job fair and we said, "Here, sign this piece of paper. You can come."
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, I was an HQE too, right? So I was at OSD when the Dr. Roper asked me to join the Air Force and become the first chief software officer. And, they reached out to me. Dr. Roper, of course, was so excited. He's like, we're going to do it in 1 month, 4 weeks. It's going to be done. They already had quite a few HQEs, Preston Dunlap was an HQE too, right? So they kind of understood a little bit the process, but not too well. And, ended up taking 3. I was at OSD already in a job, and even with all that already in place, so I wasn't, I guess, coming from industry anymore, although I was, but I was already a year in at OSD, and it still took 3 months to get me hired. So that's the other thing I tell people. I said, don't oversell, right? The fact that Dr. Roper said it would take 1 month and it took 3 kind of shattered my confidence, and excitement for the job. If he just said, hey, it's going to take 3 months, great, right? But like the fact that he said 1 month and it took 3, I almost walked away from the job, So that's something I recommend people not to do, So anyway.
Yeah, I totally understand, and it points me back to one more thing that we started when I was in the chief of staff's office too, which is coming to fruition at the end of this month. So, the RFQ is. That was the discussion of what a mission defense team is, and then the corollary to that, which was enterprise IT as a service. So back in 2015, 2016, 2017, when I started there and then ended up leaving there, that was actually one of the largest conversations going on even back then. And now it's 2022. There's a lot of companies out there that are bidding on enterprise IT as a service. And maybe the Air Force is going to make a leap toward this type of just school of thought, if that makes sense. So to have airmen do what airmen do best. Yes.
The bid was out last month, and when I joined, it's already kind of a program, and I joined 3 years ago. So it's it's just way too slow.
It's been forever, and the goodness of it, I'm still a believer, is the sense that we really need to be warfighters in whatever domain, and then we need great companies to get after things that are support. Just like our IT could be if done correctly. And I know you're a believer of making sure that we have airmen doing what they should be doing, civilians doing what they should be doing, industry doing what they should be doing, because it's that triad of individuals that actually make our DoD and the Air Force the best it is.
Yeah, I was a little shocked. I remember when I joined, a lot of people were saying, with Kessler and all these teams, that the airmen were going to become, the coders, and we're going to grow that, and we're not going to need that much of industry. I was like, this is a pipe dream. First of all, it's probably not the wise investment. You don't have enough people, but 2, you don't want to stop burning bridges with the DIB, and you want to get them excited about what's going on, and you're just making them the enemy, and by definition you're going to lose that battle because they have way more money and power than you have in the government. So it's for me, it was a non-starter. That's why when I started pushing DevSecOps, I managed to reach out to lots of the primes, and even the smaller companies, of course, because I care about everybody. But we got many of them excited about DevSecOps, investing drastically in DevSecOps. You saw companies like Lockheed announce they're going to use Platform One for all of Lockheed, including non-DoD work. So and people were like, oh, Lockheed is never going to do anything with you guys, and there was already like, it's funny how many times I heard, and that's part of the issue, back to the term limit aspect of things, both for Congress and maybe also within DoD, right? Of like people failing or like not even trying anymore because they already go in thinking they're going to lose the fight. It's already a done deal. There's no point in trying. I remember when I created the cloud native access point, replacing the cap, people told me that it was never going to happen, that people tried for 10 years and I did it in 60 days. I get it fully accredited, and we're now the largest implementation of Zero Trust in DoD, if not in the U.S. government. And if you listen to people, you would just walk and not do it. So that's why I think you need a lot of fresh air and fresh people, and have a healthy rotation of people going back to industry and back here, right?
So Nick, you're exactly right in the sense that too. And first of all, big fan of the cap and how hopefully companies going after the ITAS will use that. Hopefully, it's better than JRSS stack and all those kind of things.
It's not going to be difficult.
The bar is very low. The bar is very low. And trust me, I worked at DISA. I understand their role in life, but the reason why we have the JRSS stack the way it is, in my opinion, is that we put out a requirement for this, and then you buy, a capability that can do this much, but you're only using this much of the capability because of the way our procurement laws are written.
And you're stuck in time. It was not that bad when it did it, but the issue is stuck in time.
It is stuck in time. And what you're doing, it's getting to the whole point of our entire conversation. It took someone determined enough to try an idea that was revolutionary at the time, but people kept on saying it's not going to work. But what has changed is, first of all, you and your emphasis on it. But then second of all was the fact that times have changed, right? The technology is different. The environment's different. We have different people in leadership. We have different authorities that have moved in the last decade. So there is and different levels of risks too that people were willing to take on a project like that. And just, it frustrates me so much. Again, going to, one of the reasons why I left active duty is it frustrates me when people would just say, no, I tried that before. It didn't work. Things change every day.
It's like the HQE stuff, right? It's funny how many times people don't use tools that are given to them by Congress or whatever, right? But and they just read things that are not there. They interpret things. They choose to see it in one angle, just like the HQE example where you say, "Oh, that's supposed to be for pilot things," and it's nowhere mentioned whatsoever, right? And that's probably the biggest tool that the people don't know, but HQEs can make up to $320,000 in the government. It's pretty rare. There's only like maybe 20 of those in DoD, and it's actually a pretty good way to attract the right talent to come in, particularly people making $500,000, $1 million of salary a year, and come take that kind of role. It's already a pretty significant pay cut if you look at going to the SCS pay level, but HQEs get a little bit of a higher pay, and of course you have the term limit to make sure. It's funny how that on that one people thought about the term limit, right? That's interesting.
Oh, they did. And the benefits. So obviously, the DoD in general, the benefits is what kills our budget, right? So being invested, HQE isn't allowed to be vested like a traditional government civilian and have that retirement year over year. So for the listeners out there, they're paid a little bit more because we're not investing in their long-term benefits either. That's
the maximum pay, and like I said, it's only 20 that go that high. Most HQEs make an SCS level, salary. So
exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
So funny enough, you mentioned your career, and let's get into your retirement, right? Where you decided to kind of I'm not gonna say leave $3.5 million on the table, but there was a logic there that I love for people to understand, because we get a lot of questions from service members that are also kind of struggling, trying to see, okay, maybe if I get out and I get to see other things, maybe I could either come back in a different way, or I could just do better on the commercial side and not care. Or what was your reasoning, and how did you make that happen, I guess?
Yeah, so I'll describe it in this way. First of all, I did the calculation based on the fact that I was an 05. I was going to get 05 pay when I turned 42, basically when I could have retired. I'm 44 now. I could have retired then, got an 05 pay for the rest of my life, the insurance, all those kind of things, GI Bill. So I put it all together. Hopefully I live to be 120. No, I'm just kidding. Normal life expectancy for a male. And that's the number I came up with. But I go back to one point I made at the beginning, which was I didn't join to retire. The retirement is definitely an incentive. But what had happened is I had gone to the Pentagon as an 05, and I was sitting in my cube doing my work, got there early, would leave late, ate lunch at my desk. And then the person next to me, God bless him, was the government employee, right? So he would come in at 8 o'clock, leave at 5 o'clock, pack his lunch, take an hour lunch down at the food court, never stay a minute past when he had to. That 05 was getting paid the same I was getting paid. And it's not all about money. I know that. But the rewards and everything the Air Force can do for any officer were all the same for that person. He looked the same on paper as I did. And I just couldn't stand it basically anymore. So I ended up, and this is by fate of God, I truly think I ended up running into someone who I'd met when I was at DISA, who was going through some hard times at the time when she was a young captain and getting a divorce. And I just had befriended her and helped her out with the situation that she was going through. And I saw her as a colonel and I said, "What are you doing with your life?" She said, "I'm in the Maryland Air National Guard and I'm a colonel. It was the best decision I'd ever made." And I said, "Well, I've been looking into that." And she said, Stop. I'm going to introduce you to the person you need to talk to." So I met this person who is now my boss yet again. I met this person at Fort Meade, and she just looked at me and she's like, "Well, I'm late to a meeting. Sounds like we could use you. I don't have a job for you, but I need you to quit the Air Force, not retire, quit the Air Force. I know you don't have a commercial job. Don't worry about that. I'm sure you'll figure that out. But it'll all work out." And that's what she told me. It'll all work out. So I called my wife, of course, and I was like, "Hey, I met this person who's slightly crazier than I am, says I need to literally separate from the military with almost 16 years without my $3.3 million retirement, but she's going to figure out a way to make it work." And thank God that I made that decision because it actually ended up working out. I ended up being getting hired as an action officer in this group. She moved up to be the group commander. I was hired as her deputy. So I was a deputy group commander, went off, as I described before, to be the J6 for the state of Maryland, got promoted to 06, which is excellent. And I, very quickly, which was awesome too. It's great when you get promoted early. I would not have been promoted, in my opinion, on active duty early, but I actually ended up getting promoted early there. And then now I'm working back in the 175th as a group commander down there. All of the time, though, I was also working in commercial industry and an elected official, being able to serve in multiple hats and contribute in uniform, contribute as part of industry, and then contribute as part of the elected bodies. And I really just felt like I needed to do more. And most importantly, I needed to stay in one place to keep the family happy too. And you can do that through the Guard and Reserve.
Well, you opened the door for my question right there, right? And how did you juggle all your roles and your family life? Because it seems pretty insane, right? What you're adding, and I guess also, tell us a little bit about that crazy bet, right? And trust that you put on that lady to really jump, and take a chance at leaving the Air Force. And how quickly were you able to find a bridge, on the commercial side to help you pay the bills, right?
Yeah. So in the Guard, in the Reserve Force, we actually have this saying that a lot of people say: you have a three-legged stool. In my case, it's a four-legged stool, but you have your family, you have your work life, then you have your reserve or guard duty. And I happen to have 3 paying jobs. So at one point in any day, one of those organizations is probably mad at me. And you just try to balance the fact that, like, not all of them are mad at you at all the same time, or you don't make some mistake that's going to be non-reversible. So as always, I have a lot of great people who work for me and with me in all of my roles. But it's great to have great airmen around. And I do truly try to be home for every dinner. I do truly try to be here as much as I can, even though work brings me away and multiple hats bring me away. I'm actually getting ready to take a month's worth of guard duty and go work at Cyber Command for the Cyber National Mission Forces, which I'm very excited to do because as you can imagine, with my personality, they sent around a list that said we need some of the reserve force to come in and help with what's going on in Ukraine. And I put down my name on a piece of paper, knowing that I'm not qualified to do any offensive work or any of those kind of things. But they called me back a week later and said, yes, we'd love to have you come in and help us with some policy going on in the reserve component for Cyber Command. And of course, I said, sounds great. Now I got to actually ask my bosses on all my other fronts, to include my wife, to make sure that that's okay. But really, it's making sure that no one is really, really upset with you at this point, and lots of coffee and not sleeping.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. I'm sure, and I assume that's going to be in Maryland. So the Cyber Command deployment month, right?
It is, and again,
So
I am.
Yeah,
I'm blessed with that. That Maryland, the DMV is a great place to be a cyber person, right? We have the Mecca, NSA, Fort Meade, Cyber Command, in my opinion, for offensive, defensive warfare. And then all of the DIB that's around that. There's so many opportunities for someone who is interested in cybersecurity or in cyber in general. So it is just, it's, if we had retired or separated in Oregon, I would not have these opportunities that I have here. Since I live right outside of Fort Meade, it's 25 minutes away. It's going to be like a day job there, and I'll just be able to mobilize. I'll be able to deploy for 30 days sitting at Fort Meade.
That's pretty cool. And what's pretty cool as well is the fact that I keep calling the cyber defense of the U.S. and both on the state and local and critical infrastructure at the kindergarten level. But when you look at what's going on in Cyber Command and on the offensive side, it's probably the most advanced in the world. So it's going to be probably a lot of fun.
It definitely will be. And I view, and this is not a classified endorsement or not, I view parochially the Air Force, the DoD, as being the best of the best of the best. I'm sure other nations also think they're great at getting into bad guys' computers and causing disruption. But I view us as being the best because I want the military in general to be the best. And I truly believe in our U.S. military. And yes, there are tons of problems with our critical infrastructure and going downstream and kind of the things we've talked about throughout this conversation. But it's great. Maryland has 2 of the 3 offensive squadrons that are located in Maryland. One's in Delaware. And 2 of those 2 squadrons happen to work for me in the Guard, which is just a blessing that I'm surrounded by all these people who are super smart, and they all have their own individual stories. We have a lot of great operators that have spent 15 years as NSA Title 50 operators, and then also as guardsmen, and then working in their Title 10 authority, being operators on that side of the legal authority also. So it's just amazing to be a part of Maryland cyber in general.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, so we got a few questions from the public, and if anyone has a question, please put it into the comment section below and start with a Q so we know it's a question. There's many we already answered, so I'm not gonna make you repeat yourself because we kind of covered that during my questions. But there's a question here that says, how do we work together to better inform and educate the complexities, threats, and challenges of cybersecurity elected officials so they can understand the criticality of the growing sophistication of cyber threat actors?
Am I going first?
Yeah, you go first on that one. That's
okay. I'm going first. Okay, so there are, just to give everyone perspective, there are probably 2,000 to 3,000 bills with some overlap of topics, but individual bills that come through the Maryland State Legislature every year. So that is a lot. Why this is important to this is that having an advocacy group is the same concept of having a lobbyist, right? They're the same people. Some people call them lobbyists and term them as bad people. Advocacy group, oh, you work for an advocacy group. That's great. So, but like having a cybersecurity advocacy group, which there are a few at the state level, come and actually talk about these complexities to legislators, it's not a bad thing at all. And you can actually move state policy and state law fairly effectively if you have the right person speaking to these legislators. This is not a knock on anyone. Everyone brings their own professional background when they get elected into any level of government, right? So you just have to sit down, have a willing advocate, have someone like a lobbyist group, an advocacy group, actually go and talk to these state legislators, because there's a lot of good work that can be done and should be changed at that level. But they don't necessarily have to understand the complexities. They have to understand it's important, that the risk of doing nothing is more than the risk of doing not doing anything. Or I said it backwards. Either way, so the risk of inaction is greater than something like getting a ransomware attack, where we had St. Mary's County was actually down in the beginning due to ransomware. Their county hospital was down due to ransomware, and most literally, their infectious disease organization of doctors couldn't get access to national level data. They couldn't get access to patient data. I am pretty sure we lost lives due to a ransomware attack. Those stories are not hyperbolic cyber 9/11 type of days. Those are true stories where we had a hospital go down, their IT admin hospital go down, and we actually had a physical impact to constituents that you can actually turn that to a legislator and say, look, you're going to lose people unless you try to influence this before the bang.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a little surprised, right? That there's no more kind of eagerness of being proactive, particularly when it comes to healthcare and some of the critical infrastructure side. What I've seen at DHS when I assessed a lot of the power, water, nuclear, or pretty much every kind of critical infrastructure companies providing services to state and local government was so mind-boggling and so basic in terms of cyber capability, and they have a lack of talent. They're getting more and more money, but I've yet to see much improvement. I don't know where the money is going and how that's tracked, with FEMA grants and many other kind of avenues through CISA as well. So it's it's kind of scary to see many use cases where you've seen also in Florida, where they malicious actors got after the water and managed to change the composition of the water and potentially would have killed people if the system wasn't shut down a few hours before the water made it to the tap, right? And then you see of course the pipeline with the shutdown of the gas pipeline for days, and that was not even the pipeline itself getting hacked, but just a billing system of the pipeline, which pushed the company to shut down the pipeline because they didn't want to give access to gas for free and not track the consumption of the pipeline. So and yet you see people just moving on, right? They it has a real impact on their lives for 3-4 days, and they feel the pain. I don't know what is it going to take for people to really not move on like the next day after that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, so not many people bring up that, and I love the fact you brought up the pipeline example. People just say, "Oh, the pipeline was hacked." No, it wasn't. It was an IT system for billing. I mean, not that that's a good thing, but it was based off a poor password in their Senate testimony. But there are things that I think can be solved by money, but other things aren't going to be solved by money. It seems like the government, because we have a lack of understanding of the government in writ large, and elected officials writ large have a lack of understanding that they just literally want to set up funding mechanisms. Well, good money after bad is still bad money. So we have to do this smarter. And I'll give you this one example that I love to use with the National Guard. So the National Guard, in general, there is a tornado or a flood, and you'll see members of the National Guard in their Humvees going out, saving the dog, saving a family, doing that kind of stuff, literally filling up sandbags, right? They're like digging out, filling up sandbags, right? Well, in cybersecurity, because our laws have not quite caught up yet, in a cyber airman can't actually fill up a sandbag. And this is why they have to be on state active duty, not Title 32, which is like the Stafford Act, the Emergency Response Act. When we deployed 3,000 soldiers and airmen to the Maryland COVID response under the Stafford Act, paid by the federal government, we had 10 people on state active duty doing cyber work because we couldn't touch a keyboard. And it was the way that the laws were written. We couldn't get anyone to take risk and say, why don't you pay our airmen under this authority, the Stafford Act authority, the same as the sandbag person, the same as the nurse going to give a shot. You need to pay us under that same authority, and we'll go out and we'll touch firewalls or do whatever it has to be. Back to our firewall conversation, we'll actually make these networks more secure. And they said, nope, you're not able to do it. You can only advise them. In a Title 32 capacity, you can only advise them. And we said, well, that's ridiculous. So that means if you pay a person under Title 32, you can go to the river and then point at them and say, pick up that shovel, put the sand in the sandbag, but I'm not going to do it for you. I was so, like, I talked to our FEMA director out of Pennsylvania. It went up the chain. My 2-star was involved. I just couldn't move the bubble on that. Things have changed a little bit since then, but I made such a stink to say, just change the policy. It wasn't even a law. It was a policy interpretation of the Stafford Act more than it was a problem with the law at that point.
Is that a Maryland thing, or is that a
federal?
Yeah.
Federal. It's amazing.
So I assume that impacts, and I'm not sure how many people even understood that problem, but I'm sure you're not the only one. So that's pretty scary.
It is for sure. It is for sure.
Well, so let's see. I'm looking at the questions, a lot of the stuff we answered. Wanted to also give you the opportunity before I tell the group here what the next shows are going to be about. But wanted to give you the opportunity maybe to share a little bit about the state Senate campaign and a little bit of a closing argument, and then I'll take the final words just to point them out to the next episode.
That's great, Nick. Hey, I really do appreciate you allowing me to spend some time with you and your audience today. So after I got out of the military, started to run for office and really had my sights set on running for the state Senate in Maryland. Just like at the federal level, we have a House and a Senate. Currently, I'm a member of the House. Our Senate is 47 senators that represent all different areas of Maryland. And I am looking forward to doing some common sense things. And back to one of the questions that we've kind of been hitting on is, why is cybersecurity not interesting enough, is back to you can't get people to pay attention for long enough to say that this is important. So that also means that if you see any of my literature, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to be talking about cybersecurity, because most people who vote on a couple of kitchen table things. It's like your education, it's your safety of your community, and it's also making sure you can have a good cost of living. So people in Maryland per se can live and work here in Maryland and also maybe retire here in Maryland. So those are my overarching platforms that I'm talking about. Again, I bring my professional background and my schooling of being a cybersecurity person, being a computer science person to the state legislature. And I'm just really excited to being able to do it. I actually have a fundraiser coming up if anyone wants to come to it. I know my contact information will be a part of this with Governor Ehrlich, who is not the current governor, but was the last Republican governor. And that's coming up on the 28th of April. I would love to see you all there. We have a couple of tickets left, but it's up in Montgomery County. I'll represent part of Montgomery County, part of Howard County, if you know the geography out there in Maryland. And I'm really just looking forward to being able to continue to serve because I do think that there is a difference between public service and politics. And I'd love to talk on a whole nother 2 hours what the difference is, but I really do look forward to doing the public service aspect of it, which is not Twitter and name calling and all those kind of things people don't like about politics. It's really about just helping constituents, having a critical thought and a critical eye toward all bills, let alone what we talked about today, which is cybersecurity bills, and that you represent people on all sides of the aisle. You just represent those people down in our capital, in Annapolis. So I really do appreciate you allowing me to spend some time with you, though, today, Nick.
Well, I can tell that a lot of people that live in Maryland must feel much better after meeting you and hearing about you. I can tell you, looking at some of the representation we're getting across the actual U.S. Congress is pretty disastrous, both in terms of the age of some of these people that have no clue what's going on in the world, and the fact that people are just incompetent and complacent, and kind of the lobbying and the people getting bought left and right is pretty despicable. So we're very grateful. I don't live in Maryland, but I'm in Virginia, but regardless, very, very thankful first for you to join the show, but also for service, not only for the nation and the state of Maryland, and was very excited to be able to help you for your state campaign, and hopefully people are going to be smart enough to see when they're sitting on a pile of gold, although you never know, but I hope that's going to be the case. In the meantime, for people that want to know the next episodes, next week we're going to have Stuart Sheeler, who left the Marines in a pretty noisy statement like I did, and he's going to join the show to share a little bit of his journey and what he's going to be doing next. So it's going to be a pretty interesting episode for sure. Assuming everything pan out, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to what's going on right now. So hopefully everything's going to go well, and he's going to be here on Tuesday, 1 p.m. Next episode after that will also be a great friend of mine, Zach Butcher, who is one of the owners of Istio, the Service Mesh. When he was at Google, now works on T-Rate. We're going to talk about what a Service Mesh is, the work he's been doing with NIST on different applications, including Service Mesh, but also next generation access control, which are the two kind of critical components of Zero Trust. So Zach will be on the show on Tuesday, the 3rd of May at 1 p.m. That's going to be pretty exciting. And we have a lot of great guests lined up, trying to bring technical and non-technical episodes. Love to, if you guys have any kind of recommendation in terms of who should be on the show, shoot us know on LinkedIn. We were pretty booked until I think June, but that's always great. But if you have people you think would be awesome for the show with maybe different angles, I don't want to repeat more the same subject. So we're trying to come up with different angles. So always thankful of you guys taking the time on your Tuesdays to join us. And again, Reid, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.